You were talking earlier about having some alcoholism in your past. Um, what, in your opinion, like, what is the hardest part for someone to detach themselves from any drug? Really, I've heard you speak about this a little bit on maybe I think it was your own podcast. Um, I actually think that when someone feels really good, making decisions is a lot easier. Like making good decisions is a lot easier. Not obviously if you're completely drunk, then it might be hard to make the correct decisions. But almost like being slightly high, or people are really big into like microdosing stuff nowadays. And I found for myself that like microdosing of like mushrooms, LSD, taking kratom, things like that. They seem to assist me with staying on my plan a little bit more. They seem to assist me with staying on my diet a little bit more, just because the opposite of that, just like dealing with day-to-day life in a normal phase, is just more monotonous and not as fun, not as exciting, and therefore your overall mood might be down a little bit. What are some of your opinions on that?
Well, I have a certain opinion on it that I don't think anyone's ever voiced before the way I think of it. So what I think of it is this. Initially, the question. So let's use your example using kratom and microdosing psilocybin, which I'd love to talk about microdosing psilocybin at a different point. But using those two has relieved, you said, your boredom and increased your ability to focus on your goal. So first of all, kratom acutely as well as psilocybin acutely increases dopamine transmission. So in a way, it has some effect similar to an amphetamine or something like that. So it may help you focus acutely. That's why some people notice if they use 100 to 300 milligrams of like a golden teacher mushroom before working, they can be actually more focused. It's not a psychedelic effect. That's not serotonin. Remember that psilocybin binds and psilocin bind to serotonin receptors, but downstream they cause some transmission of dopamine that's acute. So that's how that might be working. The other question or the other example is a more interesting one. Is you're saying that you feel bored otherwise. So a lot of us addicts feel that feel. I'm not saying you're an addict, but I mean a lot of addicts feel that feeling like it's a little bit boring. I want something to look forward to in the day, or I want some. They actually want to think differently, to feel differently. I believe that the reason for this is because something in a lot of, not all addicts fall on this path, because there are some people that get addicted, for example, to opiates accidentally. But I'm talking about somebody that got into a drug because they used it, for example, with their friends one day. Their friends used it. The next day, their friends want to go back to work. This guy, though, felt such a difference from his status quo to when he used the drug that huge difference becomes a temptation the next day. It's a huge opportunity cost. The other person doesn't have the same opportunity cost. Where does that come from? I think that comes from not having a psychology originally that is suiting toward yourself. And using that drug somehow improved your psychology. The problem with those hedonistic drugs is they're not sustainable. The effect usually declines with time, requiring you to use a higher dose, or you get to a point like with benzos where they just don't work, as we see from what happened to Jordan Peterson, unfortunately. And that's an accidental example, right? Someone's feeling anxiety, got to using a medication, and the medication destroyed him. Benzo withdrawal is the worst withdrawal on earth, the most painful. So basically the issue that I'm thinking is that's how addicts get into addiction usually, that they have something in their neurotransmitter systems that the drug changes that feels better for them, gives them a sense of relief. And then the other stage of it is when they quit the drug. This is very interesting and requires some looking into neuroscience. So when you have neurotransmitters upregulated, like when you're using a drug all day, it's not just serotonin that increases neurogenesis. When people, for example, use amphetamines, they have more plasticity in their brain from more neurogenesis. The same happens with most drugs. So what does that mean? That means you adapt to the drug you're using and the lifestyle you have when you're using it. And when you suddenly cut that drug off, cold turkey, like if you go to AA, you have the solidarity of AA, you have the prayer, you have all these kind of things, but your brain has now just become really rigid because you've cut down. Your brain is used to the interference from the drug, so your brain has down-regulated all its systems, and once you stop the drug, the brain is really rigid. It's stuck on its old ways. So I think a lot of the ways that alcoholics can be treated and other addicts is with sophisticated use of pharmacology that tries to address the actual issues they had. Like if it was alcohol that you enjoyed, you probably have some GABAergic deficit. GABA is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter system in the body. You know, if you're using amphetamines, you may have some other kind of psychological pre-construct that needs to be altered. You know, that's my view of it. Sorry to be long-winded.
No, that's really cool. And
That's amazing.
That makes me wonder, when it comes to, let's say, someone trying to build a good habit or break an old habit. I think you were just talking about alcohol, right? What is a way that people can maybe use supplements or pharmacology to aid with that? I think it'd probably be more helpful if I mentioned something specific. You gave the example of alcohol, but let's say that somebody they have a really bad habit of, they get depressed or they get angry and they just reach towards a certain type of food to help with that, right? Because some people, they use food to help them feel better. So how can people use those things to?
That's an interesting question. You know, that's a really interesting example too, because you mentioned food, and food usually addresses people's depressive tendencies or whatever. It's a source of comfort because food, especially sugar, causes a dopamine transmission in the brain. So you're going for dopamine, actually, just like when people go for drugs. The reason drugs are called dope is because they all in some way affect dopamine. So it's interesting. They're sort of using it like a drug. The funny thing is, what causes people to habituate themselves to something in terms of hormones in the brain is actually dopamine. So if you can upregulate dopamine signaling, actually, it's interesting. So sometimes when there's elevated dopamine signaling, people will be more prone to doing these kind of things, like eating a lot. Like you'll find people who use a lot of amphetamines, sometimes eating a lot of sugar, doing things like that. So sometimes, or gambling. So sometimes they lose control, actually. But it seems that dopamine habituates something to what they're doing. So for example, if you're studying something you don't like, and you are responsive to an amphetamine, you take a 5 milligram amphetamine and you study that same subject you don't like for 4 days a week for a few months, you will now like that subject. It will change the way you interact with it. So that's one thing about dopamine. The other thing about changing habits is that in general, so when we're children, our brain can birth new cells in every part of the brain. It's completely regenerative. As we age, particularly after we pass puberty, and particularly in our 30s, the rate of new neuron cell development in the brain diminishes dramatically and only happens in 2 areas of the brain, one called the subglandular zone and one called the subventricular zone. So you have much less potential to create new neurons, which means you have less potential to change the structure of your brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together, but they're much less likely to rewire when you have less growth factors and less plasticity. So that's really why I believe you can't teach an old dog new tricks. The old dog doesn't have growth factors in its brain, and the brain is not plastic. So I've noticed personally, for example, one of the great benefits of SSRIs or other neurotrophic compounds, which there are many, like cerebrolysin, for example, a very potent one, is that if you have upregulated neurogenesis for a while and you start to change your behavior, the behavior becomes much easier to adapt to. I mean, this is a very, very noticeable effect of having higher neurogenesis. You feel less stuck in your patterns. And when you change your pattern, you can really adapt to it.
Hey guys, if you like this clip, go ahead and comment down below and let us know what you liked about it. All right. Share this with a friend. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And also, we are on Reddit and Discord. All that's down below. All our sponsors and everyone that supports us down below there too. So you can get whatever you like from us. All right. Peace.